First, I want to say I'm glad you brought up Chicago, Stephen A., because what's happening in Chicago is a humanitarian crisis. It's a humanitarian crisis. It's an American tragedy, and not nearly enough attention is being paid toward it. And this is what the idea of Black Lives Matter is about. It's not, philosophically, we're not just talking about police brutality against black victims. We're talking about the fact that black life seems to be cheap in this country, and that if this were happening to a population that wasn't black, what's happening in Chicago, you could say, well, it's black on black crime. Still, the victims are people of color, are people. You know, those lives matter too, and it's being underreported. I'm glad you brought it up. Whenever someone like Charles Barkley brings up publicly the idea of personal or communal responsibility for behavior, as opposed to institutional or societal responsibility. In other words, personal responsibility himself, communal responsibility, in this case, black people, versus institutional responsibility. That could be the court systems, it could be law enforcement, it could be the media. What you will find is those of a progressive bent will tend to attack someone if they're talking about personal or communal responsibility, and those of a conservative bent will tend to attack someone if they're talking about societal or institutional responsibility. The fact is, both points of view are instructive. They are not mutually exclusive. It's perfectly fair for Barkley to bring up the idea of personal or communal responsibility as part of the formula that goes toward addressing a larger problem. I think the reason that some would have a heightened sense of this right now, if they have a negative reaction to what Barkley said, is the idea of, let's take again philosophically, Black Lives Matter, in parentheses, too. Black Lives Matter, too. So when people say things like, well, all lives matter, people from the Black Lives Matter will say, well, wait a minute, no, you're missing the point. Parenthetically, it's implied, too. We matter too. And so when someone tends to or will focus responsibility on personal or communal behavior, others might say that right now is not the issue. I agree with you. It's a legitimate point of view. It very much belongs in the discussion, and it's not mutually exclusive with the other point of view.
You're absolutely right. But let me say this. First of all, I completely agree with you. That's the only issue. That was a big issue that Black Lives Matter and those in support of it had with me, because I got on them for booing former presidential candidate Martin O'Malley out of Maryland because he said all lives matter, and he got booed. And I'm like, why are you booing a presidential candidate? He's got to cater to all of America, not just black America. Maybe if it was Black Lives Matter too, it would have been better. But then you had Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, who blessed me with his presence to come on my show and really explain what it was about, because the reason why the two parenthetically isn't there, as you would say, is simply because you have a black community out there that feels like they've never mattered. And so because of that, because we as a black community, by and large, throughout history, have never felt like we truly mattered, we feel the emphasis to omit the two.
And Stephen A., that's the reason I wanted to commend you for bringing up Chicago. Because when you think about it, people can try to drive a wedge and say, well, on the one hand, we're talking about police behavior institutionally and systemic kind of problems. And on the other hand, we're talking about, well, black on black crime, for example, in Chicago. But philosophically, the idea is the way Chicago gets underreported and the ongoing issue with police violence all have to do with the idea that black life seems cheap throughout the history of this country.
Good point.
I want to bring this back to Barkley's original point. On its face, what he said is uncontroversial. Of course we need police. The black community or impoverished communities especially need police. Police need to behave properly, but of course you need police. You also need traffic lights, and as the president made the case in the previous election, you need meat inspectors too. I mean, like, these are social services and societal necessities. Of course, police are necessary, and as you mentioned at the top, Stephen A., obviously violence towards police or anyone is unacceptable.